So far, how are telecom operators coping with the surge in demand?
So fortunately, the operators had a bit of advanced warning in terms of getting our networks what we call emergency ready, vis-a-vis redundancies being put in place, the network elements being up to snuff, making sure we have the maximum number of our cell towers on air. So I think there was an adequate amount of preparation for our networks. Now, of course, that did not mean that we were completely ready for that surge when about 30% increase of traffic on data hit our networks. And so we were quite precise in the way we responded. Of course, we had to look to where this was coming from, and we noticed that this was as a result of increased data usage from streaming services. So we had a very targeted approach. We went to the DOT, which is the government arm, and said, please work with us in informing these streaming companies like YouTube and Hulu and TikTok and Amazon and others, saying, please reduce the transmission bit rates from high definition to standard definition. And surprisingly, that brought the traffic down back to just about 15 to 20% above what was normal. So that was the first intervention that we were able to do to stabilize traffic on the network.
So having said that, Rajan, are you then saying that there's no risk of a collapse or a congestion that could pose a problem to the country?
So we seem to have hit the sort of peak, if you will. So what we have seen is a bit of a shift in traffic patterns. Clearly, the big peak that we used to see in the mornings and the evenings resulting from the patterns emerging from commuters, that has shifted to a bit more of an even distribution on the network. And obviously, we've had this big migration of our workers out of the urban areas into the rural areas. So we've seen some shifting of the distribution of traffic, which does not mean that we do not have surges in certain hotspots in the country. So our efforts right now are to continue to monitor the network to see where these hotspots are emerging at various points in time, and then involve ourselves in network management to ensure that these surges don't bring the network down. So I think that is working very well in terms of our folks managing the networks, making sure that the smartphone or the smart hands are on the street. We had to work with the government to make sure that these people were given particular permissions to be on the street during the quarantine period. And because of that help we got, we were able to maintain the network in the instances when there were, for example, a fiber cut, or when one of our cell towers was going down. We also worked with the local municipalities to bring online additional capacity by putting on temporary cell towers.
Sure.
In India, we have this thing called cows, not our sacred cows, but cell on wheels, which we are able very quickly to roll into places where we are facing congestion or peak traffic and begin to deal with it. So these measures have helped us cope with maintaining our networks at 99.99 uptime.
Cell on wheels. I love that. Rajan, what do you think about the proposed tariff increase? Do you think that's going to be delayed further?
So there has been a round of tariff increases, and our operators have acted very responsibly in ensuring that affordability is never a concern or a problem for our citizens. Specifically, in the particular instance when we saw the bottom of the pyramid group of our customers facing extreme hardships because they had feature phones and not smartphones, and so consequently they could not get to a recharge station, the operators put out free SMSs, free voice calling, and a free incoming minutes for the period in time that the quarantine is lasting, so that this specific group of customers that was facing the hardship was targeted and afforded relief so that they could continue being in contact with people that they were interested in being in touch with.
Rajan, prior to the pandemic, telecom operators in India were in a pretty dire situation. Do you think this pandemic has somehow helped them come through and would help them survive?
So thank you for raising that issue. Yes, for several years, and most recently with the what we call Supreme Court ruling on adjusted gross revenue, where several billions of dollars of additional liability was imposed on the network operators, in addition to the tremendous amount of debt that had accumulated to operators as a result of the extremely high pricing of our spectrum here in India. The cumulative effect of all of that, including the fact that 30% of every rupee that is earned by an operator goes back to the government and does not come back to us. A very anomalous type of situation led the industry into a very disastrous financial position. In spite of that, the operators were able to invest in our networks. We have, at this particular point, over 550,000 cell towers. We have over 1.2 million base stations in operation. We have 365 switching centers. Nowhere else in the world do you have that type of a configuration of networks. So we were able, in spite of the financial distress of the operators, to make adequate implementation and investments to ensure that the critical needs of the customers in terms of coverage and capacity, by and large, was being maintained at this particular time. And I think this particular period has shown, look, the health of the nation in a period of health concerns is as equally important in order to sustain the connectivity and the ongoing economic activity, at least what's left of it, in the country.
Yeah. Rajan, what about the future of Vodafone India? Do you still see a risk of it going bankrupt?
So I think the operators, obviously there has been some chatter about this. As an association, we are very hopeful and we are quite convinced that Vodafone Idea is doing the right things in order to contain and continue its operations. And by the way, we have received some very strong indications from the government that they are not keen to have Vodafone Idea exit and go to a two-market operator environment. Even in a country such as the U.S., you notice that the Justice Department took a hard look when they went from 4 operators to a suggested 3, ultimately T-Mobile and Sprint merging to form a consortium of fuel of 3. So you can imagine in a country like India, where we have 1.1 billion people and as many connections, going just down to 2 pose significant threats, if you will, in terms of attracting foreign direct investment and future investments in the sector itself and the competitive landscape. So the government is keen to ensure that Vodafone Idea stays, and we have some indication that they are going to work with the industry going forward in terms of ensuring that we can deal with the ongoing financial crisis. And we expect that Vodafone Idea will continue to be a very valuable and a very competitive player in the marketplace as we go forward.